Hi there, welcome back to the channel. So today I will be talking about the cost to become a permanent resident of Canada. Now in a previous video I said that I would be talking about the cost for permanent residency, and the purpose for doing this video is really so that you know what the cost is and can budget accordingly. I previously made a budget for permanent residency and that budget was too low, and no one doesn't really talk about the cost for permanent residency. Like, you hear so many people who have immigrated to Canada, but you don't really hear anything about the cost for permanent residency. So that is why I decided to do this video, to one, educate you, and two, to allow you to be able to make an accurate budget towards permanent residency. The places that I get, like for example on the list I have education assessment. On that education assessment, what you'd see is that there's specific places that you have to go through to get that education assessment, and that is regulated by the government of Canada. So therefore the price would be the same unless it has increased, which is where you would have to increase your budget. But for right now, these were the amounts that I have paid, and the possibility of the price going down is very low, but the possibility that the price possibly increased is possible. So overall, I created a budget. So I have a section called actual and a section called budgeted. So budgeted is the amount that I previously budgeted. Some things were not budgeted because I didn't know that there was a cost for this. But everything that I budgeted for, they are all on the list, and more than likely you'll see that most of them the price has increased, not decreased. But let's get right into it. So basically every document that I had to apply for, I had to pay for it in some way. And in the future I'm going to do a whole video on the documents that are required for permanent residency, but every stream is different. So I will be going through a lot of the streams and give you an idea of how exactly permanent residency work and how you can apply directly for permanent residency. And in a previous video I even spoke about how you can come to Canada as an absolute beginner, where I spoke about all the streams for you to come into Canada, which is basically broken down into two sections. You have temporary residence and you have permanent residence. Now permanent residence is the one that I'm talking about today, but I did go through temporary resident processes. I've gone through a lot about international students, the whole application process, and all of that is all on my channel. You can go into the playlist section and you will see videos all about studying in Canada, getting the student visa, and all of that is already there. So the first thing I got is a criminal record check. So with this criminal record check, you can actually get a criminal record check. For example, if you've only lived in one country, let's say for example you are moving from Jamaica, then from Jamaica, once you have your criminal record check and you haven't gone back to Jamaica longer than 6 months, it is valid. Even if it's been 10 years ago and you're just applying for permanent residency, it is still valid. So that criminal record check can be used. But once you are living into Jamaica or you've been there more than 6 months, since that criminal record check, you will need to redo the criminal records check for every single country that you have been in since you were 18 years old or since 10 years ago. So if 10 years ago would reach to 28 years old, so it's either since you were 18 years old for everyone under 28 years old. After that it would be since 10 years before your current age. So that's how criminal records check work, and you will need to show a records check for every single country you've been in for more than 6 months. So that there is that 6-month period where once it's within that time, you won't need to provide a criminal record check. In the event that you went to the country and then you left and then you went back and then you left and it totals to more than 1 year, you will need to also show a police certificate for that as well, aka the criminal records check. And that is a requirement. Even though it is not stated on the website, it is a requirement even if you weren't there continuously. So make a big note of that. If you've been into a country and you keep going there, leaving, and it wasn't consistent, it doesn't matter. They still want a criminal record check once you've been there more than 1 year in total, even if it's separate time. So if you went there for 3 months, then you left 3 months another time, and then you left 3 months again, they want a criminal record check for that. With all of these documents, I also started to gather these documents 1 year in advance of applying for permanent residency. Plan was 1 year in advance, but I ended up applying for permanent residency earlier than I originally planned on applying. But you want to plan 1 year in advance and start applying within that time for all the documents, because it does take time, and more than likely you're in a job or you're in school or something and you really don't have time to be sitting down getting all these documents. That is why you get them early, so that you don't have to be rushing and you need time off from your work to get all these documents. So the criminal records check was $80. My budget was $50, but it ended up being $80 in total for the criminal records check. And all the prices that I'm going to be quoting will be all Canadian dollars. The next document is education assessment. This education assessment was $282, and this education assessment is where you assess your last qualifications, and that alone was $282. And my budget there was $300. So I previously looked at the amount for this and saw the amount, and that was my budget, and then it came to $282, so pretty close to my $300. Next, I needed a transcript. That transcript is what you need to send to the education assessment body. They will assess that transcript, and you also send the final qualification that you get, whether that is a degree, certificate, whatever certificate it is, you provide that, you provide a transcript. So to get that transcript, it was like $20 to get that. The next thing you'll need is a language test. Now, a language test is mandatory for every single person that wants to become a permanent resident of Canada. So this language test was $360, and it is mandatory for everybody. It doesn't matter if your original language is English or not. You will need to do a language test for English, and if you want points for French, then you will need to test your French as well. So this language test was $360. Okay, now we get into the application for provincial nomination. Now, this is the nomination that I got first. If you get that nomination, it does make your application stronger. It makes your application preferred because they select persons. Let's say, for example, if you're applying through Express Entry, it is a points-based system, and that nomination gives you 600 points. So that places you on the top of the list automatically, because 600 points is the maximum someone outside of Canada can get, and you're getting that from the nomination. And then you get points for your age, you get points for your education, you get points for your work experience, and so many other things. So because of that, nomination is actually very, very advantageous for you, and it is very important to get it once you are qualified to do so. The nomination was exactly $300. It didn't include any tax, which was very nice. I thought it was plus tax. It wasn't. It was exactly $300 for nomination in Prince Edward Island. And if you're getting nominated in a different province, then the price may vary. But for Prince Edward Island, and if you're applying in PEI, then the cost for you will be $300. Next, after getting provincial nomination, then it is time to apply for permanent residency at IRCC, which is the government of Canada. Now, applying to them requires you to pay an application fee and also a right to permanent residency fee. Now, the right to permanent residency fee can be paid afterwards, but honestly, I just paid it together with the application fee, but you can choose to pay after being approved for permanent residency. But the reason why I paid for it initially and upfront is because they would refund you the money afterwards if you don't actually get approved for permanent residency, but you paid for right of permanent residency. They would refund the money based on, I think it was like the terms and conditions for refund. So I was like, okay, then since they would refund it, then I would get back my money anyways, so I just paid the money up front. So the application for permanent residency is $1,315. This increased just a couple months before I applied, maybe like 1 month before I applied for permanent residency. The amount increased by $415, but the amount was previously $900, which was the amount that I budgeted. And then when I was about to apply, it increased to $1,315. So just the application fee alone was a huge amount in total. But yeah, that was the amount. And then the right to permanent residency is $515. The next step is to get the medical exam. I made a video about permanent residency previously, saying that I'm officially a permanent resident of Canada, and I went through the whole process, timelines and all of that in terms of becoming a permanent resident of Canada. So you can check out that video after this one. So for the medical exam, I paid a total of $585 for the medical exam, and it was, I believe it was $400 with the doctor. And then when I went to the hospital, they charged me $200. I think that's how it was broken down. And the hospital does chest x-ray and they do blood work to make sure you don't have any critical illness. So all the other things that I paid for were not budgeted at all because I didn't know these things were required. So the first thing is a permanent resident application photo that I had to go and get. I remember when I was about to apply and it says the photo was mandatory, even though at another point it was saying the photo wasn't mandatory. The other spot said that it was mandatory. So I remember that night I went to Walmart and got the picture taken, and that was $33. I also needed a document notary public, and that was $20. These are just additional small expenses. While I was in Jamaica, because I got permanent residency just a couple days before I traveled to Jamaica, I wouldn't be able to travel back to Canada on a visa because my visa was my study visa. It was a student visa, so I wouldn't be able to travel back into the country with it because I was a permanent resident, and as a permanent resident you cannot return into the country with a visa. So I had to get a permanent resident travel document. So that permanent resident travel document application was $50. And then afterwards, when I went there physically, they charged me to print my ID. When I went to submit my passport, they place the permanent resident travel document in your passport. It looks very similar to a visa, but when you read it, it sounds very different and it has a different color. But it looks very much like a visa. It is placed in your passport like a visa nevertheless, but when you read it, it says that you're a permanent resident. So that was the document that I used to travel back to Canada and was able to enter through the border through that, and I returned to Canada as a returning resident versus returning to Canada as a student or a worker and all these things. I actually returned as a returning resident. So that's one of the advantages of returning to Canada as a permanent resident. It was very easy compared to if you travel here as a temporary resident, where they want you to be showing bank statements and all these things. And for citizens and permanent resident, immigration is a different area, where this is just, they really just focus on what are you bringing into the country. That's what the guy was pretty focused on, like, what are you bringing here? And I was like, I don't have anything to declare. And he's like, what do you have in your suitcase? I'm like, just personal items, my laptop, my phone. Personal items, you don't declare those things. Snacks, clothes, those aren't things that you declare. So he's like, what's in your suitcase? And I was like, that's what I have. And then he's like, no fish, no meat. I told him I don't have anything to declare, but he's still, any fish, any meat. So I told him no, no fish, no meat, no nothing like that. And he's like, okay, you can go ahead. And that was it. But yeah, there were customs. When you're a resident of Canada, they're more focused on what you're bringing into the country versus can you come into the country or not. Are you going to a separate line versus when you're a temporary resident? It's a different area that they send you, but as a permanent resident, they send you through a different area and you just use the kiosk and smooth sailing. Except for that part with the declaration story. And yeah, that was all the documents that I paid for. And the total was, drumroll please, $3,586.31. $5,856.81. Now, somebody commented under my video, my permanent resident video, and said that the total was $4,000, and you were very, very close to the amount. You said $4,000, it came to almost $3,600. So you were very, very close with the total that I spent on permanent residency. And this is just to acquire the documents. You also need to have money inside of your account to also show that you can sustain yourself inside of Canada and make sure that you won't be dependent on the country. And I'm going to show you that breakdown in this video right now. So hold on, let me pull it up on my computer and I'm going to show you how much you need to show for permanent residency. Okay, so how much do you need to show for permanent residency? So for permanent residency, it depends on how many people you are bringing into the country, and it varies with how many people you are bringing into the country with you in terms of your family members. Now, for the first person, let's say you're just applying for yourself alone to become a permanent resident and you do not have a job offer. You do not have a job offer. If you have a job offer, that is very different and it is way less if you have a job offer. If you don't have a job offer, this amount applies to you, and the total is $13,757. My camera is about to die and I'm like, should I continue? Should I change the battery? Let's change it. Let's try it for a little bit. So that's for one person. The second person, so let's say anybody at all you're bringing, your spouse, your children, that's the only people they consider as family, by the way. You can't bring your sibling, you can't bring your uncle, your aunt, your mother, your father. They aren't your family, unfortunately. The only people Canada considers as your family members is your spouse and your children. All right, so the second one, so if it's two of you coming, it is $17,127, and this needs to be in your account. This cannot be in anybody else's bank account. This needs to be in your account because you are becoming a permanent resident. You are going to settle into their country. You can't be living off somebody else when you want to settle into a new country, and there's no guarantee that the person is going to give you the money. So therefore, you need to have this money in your bank account. So this is very, very important. And if it's three persons, it is $21,055, and it keeps going up and up. I'll leave the link to this website down below so that you can see it. But these are the amounts. That is how much in total, $3,600 basically in total I spent to become a permanent resident of Canada. And on top of that, I needed to have money in my bank account. And one thing you have to make sure is, if you want to come to Canada, you need to plan this way in advance. You can't decide today you want to become a permanent resident of Canada and apply tomorrow. Maybe you can, maybe you're that rich and you can just apply tomorrow, but most of us aren't. So therefore, you need to be planning way in advance so you can gather all the monies, and that's really it. Like, gather the money. The money is the main thing. The documents, in terms of processing times, maximum a document would take 6 months. So maximum 6 months before you apply, you start preparing everything and putting together everything before you apply. But other than that, that's really it. The money and the documents. That's all it is to permanent residency: money and documents. And yeah, once you have those things and they are foolproofed, I don't see what's holding you back. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. Make sure you make a budget in advance before you travel to Canada. Make sure you make a budget if you want to immigrate to Canada. But this is the cost to become a permanent resident of Canada. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Definitely check out this video on your screen right now. It is all about me talking about the timelines to become a permanent resident of Canada, and I hope it becomes helpful for you. So definitely check it out. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in that video. Bye.